true definition of what energy is. Magnetism itself, if we were to take a point of inertia, which is certainly so a nonsensical term since there is no point, inertia itself is non-Cartesian. It is by definition counter space, and the true definition of what energy is. Is drawing a simple circle. But here we have, and let's do it again, except try to be more perfect since I'm doing this by hand. Here we have the hypertrochoidal pattern, which shows the magnetic circle. The only way the loss of inertia manifests itself is the manifestation of a circle. It's a two-dimensional circle. But magnetism is three-dimensional, or is the creation of three-dimensional space. But this is necessitatively only due and resultant to the mass that it is three-dimensional. Magnetism itself, if we were to take a point of inertia, which is certainly so a nonsensical term since there is no point, inertia itself is non-Cartesian. It is by definition counter space, and the true definition of what energy is. But if magnetism itself, if we were to take a point of inertia, which is certainly so a nonsensical term since there is no point, inertia itself is non-Cartesian. It is by definition counter space, and the true definition of what energy is. Electricity is the inertia. The loss of that inertia manifests itself in a geometric form pattern, but that form pattern is not three-dimensional. It is resultantly and demonstrably so three-dimensional in that it has volume, but magnetism itself is two-dimensional. It is only resultantly three-dimensional and contains and creates volume. It is not voluminous, but it is by definition that which creates volume by nature of the mass which it must transverse. Here we can actually see the hypertrochoidal pattern that you actually find underneath the ferrocell, as evidenced here from one of my videos, and here, as you can see 1,000 times over, the quote-unquote spirograph-like pattern that forms the construct. What these are constructive and destructive interferences, as commonly found in the double-slit experiment, but unfortunately, modern science being the bullshit that it is,
and these are de Broglie waves. De Broglie waves. all these calculations, as we had all managed to derive these calculations that show the de Broglie waves from this understanding of standing waves, but in this animation, Gabriel has made it very clear what's actually going on, and the understanding of all of these things. It's clear that these are real waves. Real waves are happening that explain the nature of matter as being standing waves.
Magnetism is two-dimensional. Inertia, the loss of that inertia, and this of course is perfectly in line with the holographic model of the nature of the universe. Magnetism is only three-dimensional, resultant to the nature of the mass, by which it must, if coherent, reciprocate itself to termination. Magnetism is only three-dimensional, resultant to the nature of the mass, by which it must, if coherent, reciprocate itself to termination. Really, it is an expanding circle. Nothing is moving like my cursor is currently. Moving outwards as you see my cursor is moving. We actually have, technically, I could draw this same two-dimensional geometry by showing an increasing circle going from an infinitesimally small point, will actually be a counterpoint in counter space, to a larger and larger and larger and larger and larger circle. So that would actually be, according to the geometry of the nature of magnetism, the way in which I would, quote, draw the loss of inertia would be an increasing circle instead of a point moving out and then moving back again. Of a point moving out and then moving back again, kind of like a comet going around the sun. It would just be an increasing circle and then a decreasing one. Upon termination, nothing is emitted by the loss of that inertia from counter space, but saying from implies a Cartesian coordinate, but counter space has no point by which we may define from. So we would actually have to imagine this as an expanding circle and then a contracting one, and then apply our understanding of geomagnetic precession, because we not only have the divergence and the phase, but we have the geomagnetic precession, which draws out, if you will, for lack of a better term, this toroidal, because the inverse image of this torus is the hyperboloid, the hourglass that is the negative image of a torus. The inverse of an hourglass is a torus, and the inverse of a torus is the hyperboloid. These form the geometry of force and motion, and the inverse geometry to that, inertia and acceleration. Everything begins with inertia and acceleration, within which we actually have a rate of decay of loss of inertia, which therefore manifests itself resultantly as the hypertrochoidal two-dimensional, or the magnetic field. But magnetism is not something different from dielectricity. Magnetism is just the manifestation of dielectricity. I kind of drew that really crooked. Magnetism is the manifestation of dielectricity as resultant to the loss of its energy, which is counter space, is pure potential, is pure energy, pure non-Cartesian actuality. This is true power is rest, not manifestation of power. One might think ignorantly, as any human being would, that power would be an atomic bomb going off, for example. Well, that's true power. True power, one might think. But obviously, it's just the inverse of that, magnetism being analogous to the explosion itself, but that is impotency. The release of that power, the release of that energy is force and motion. It is the absolute loss of true power. True power would be that 3-pound lump of plutonium that sits in your hand like an innocent baseball. I mean, that is true power. That is about the closest analogy I could draw. I kind of drew that crooked there. It's hard to draw a perfect circle freehand like this on a computer screen to get the hypertrochoidal pattern, but I think you get it now. So anyway, thanks so much for watching. If you like this video, just click the link below. Anything to expand your mind. But this is the secret of Mother Nature, the conjugate nature of magnetism and dielectricity. Both are inextricably connected at the very core. One, magnetism is not something different than dielectricity. Magnetism would what we'd be calling, what we would denotatively and ignorantly call force, but it's not force. It is simply the loss of inertia that we understand to be dielectricity, or the counterspatial pure energy of the nature of the universe. Magnetism itself, if we were to take a point of inertia, which is certainly so a nonsensical term, since there is no point, inertia itself is non-Cartesian. It is by definition counter space, and the true definition of what energy is.
Knowledge is solely an attribute of the mind. Sensation is solely an attribute of the body. Mind is static light, the one and only power source of this universe. Thus thinking, you see what man calls life in a new light. You see it as the manner in which God manifests the idea of light and eternal life by dividing his one idea into countless pairs of many seemingly separate ideas. For that is what vibrating light waves are. These waves of light emerge from their fulcrum zeros and disappear into them in endless repetitions, forever and ever. The wave is an extension of heaven to earth and back again. The wave is a projection from the spiritual universe of rest to a resting point in the physical universe, and back again to the spiritual universe for renewal of power to repeat the journey. Another way of saying it is that the wave is an emergence from the static condition of rest through the dynamic condition of motion to the static condition and back again, or that it is an extension of cause through effect and back again through effect to cause. And your very body is founded upon the light of love. The light of love is the only force in all this universe.
We're upsetting the whole of the organic structure of the decaying mile or two of the earth, which gives us our life. In your periodic chart, carbon appears 3.5 octaves from Alpha Non and 5.5 octaves from Omega Non. Why not 4.5 octaves from Alpha Non? Beginning is the end. And if you count them by the inert gases, you'll find that neon is the central one, and they're four on either side. Carbon is on one side of that, and silicon on the other. Is artesian water the same as unbound water? No. Artesian water is water that has filled the galleries and caves and crevices in the rock everywhere from rainwater. That is water that's evaporated from the ocean or from the earth, goes into the heavens and comes back again and seeps through the underground rivers. It's great underground rivers, just as there are great overground rivers. And that is the water that we call the rain cycle, the rainwater cycle. It rises and falls and seeps in through and comes out again. That is rainwater cycle of either artesian or other wells that are nearer the surface, is the water that is lessening because of the taking of the tree growth down and of the destruction of the oxygen in the atmosphere that makes it necessary to pull more and more and more oxygen from the earth for its necessity, and not succeeded in doing, raises the temperature of the earth. The unbound water is water that is being released from the crystal structures, like the granite and the silicon. The artesian water is that which has already come out and circulating in the atmosphere to the clouds and back again. Please explain briefly what you mean by the term extending the fulcrum. In my understanding, the fulcrum is the stand that supports the seesaw. Do you mean by extension to make it higher? Or do you mean to make the seesaw longer? I mean to make the extension, the fulcrum of the seesaw. The fulcrum is there in nature always. The moment you express a desire to do something, to make an action, then you extend from the fulcrum both ways. You make the seesaw. That's what it is to extend it, the amount of energy that you have. If you do not extend the fulcrum, you seemingly extend it. You seemingly divide its power. Because children on either end of the seesaw can express the power of motion. But that is all they do, express the power of motion. And that power of motion they express is the power borrowed from the stillness of the fulcrum at the center. I do not always have to like to say it's a seeming extension, because the universe is only seeming. Perhaps if I use the word, it's a thought extension. And it is. It's an imagined extension. In your thinking, you imagine. And you cannot imagine objectively without creating motion objectively in your imagining. And so it is in the thinking process of nature there seems to be an extension or division which takes power or borrows seeming power without borrowing it but seeming to. Before I say it, the extension of power is like a person pulling away from the fulcrum with an elastic band that stretches and strains and makes it harder and harder and harder to pull away from it. But on the opposite side, there's equal pulling away to balance that pulling. But the power is in the fulcrum, not in the... For if a man, if you stood out on the prairie and pulled at a rope, you have no difficulty pulling at that rope. It will not pull you back. But you hit the post there, and the post does not move. And you take an elastic band and you hitch it to it, and you stretch away from it. You find it pulling back. Therefore, you've created two conditions at the same time. You've created condition of extension and condition of expansion, and of reflection. That's the action and reaction nature. From the zero you have extended in every direction, because you cannot extend this direction from the fulcrum without extending in the opposite direction to balance it. The two conditions of decentration and concentration of mental thinking have been established in what we call an electric current. If you let that elastic go, it will go back to where it started from and disappear in the fulcrum. That fulcrum is the zero. That which we borrowed from the fulcrum is a multiplication of that zero plus and minus. One balancing the other, one offsetting the other. You borrowed 50 from there by your pulling, 50 plus. On the opposite side of that is a 50 minus. 50 minus and 50 plus total together a zero. Nothing in nature ever exceeds zero. It seems to. And so we have multiplying and divided universe into pairs of opposite conditions of compression and expansion, two opposite pressures which make it possible to run our engines and do all the things we have and run the engine of our heartbeat and so forth. But the fulcrum of every extension, every seesaw motion, the fulcrum never moves. That is its zero, and the elastic bands will pull together and disappear into the light from which it came, into the zero light from which it came, to divide itself into two lights that will illumine the bodies that have extended from it. Those lights illumine and warm and heat and cool the bodies that are extended from it to make a universe like that. To make a universe that fits the imaginings of your mind. When it retracts back to that, there's no more warmth to warm the bodies, no more light to light the bodies. The imagined universe disappears insofar as that one desire is concerned. Life has appeared and disappeared in death, and it will again reappear. The extension of the fulcrum and its multiplication to a point of equal potential to that which is borrowed from the fulcrum is right, with all of the effects that is created by so doing, the effects of warmth and heat and cool and growth and decay and moisture that make up this universe. And when that elastic band pulls that back into the fulcrum, there's an absolute disappearance of all of it. The whole universe can't disappear at once because it isn't created that way. But that one pulsation will disappear. And the pulsations which appear by extending the fulcrum and retracting, those pulsations begin with an incredible speed, with an incredibly small duration. Frequencies of millions and millions of extensions and retractions. The seesaw extending and retracting so that its frequency is 186,000 miles a second. The frequency is growing larger, duration, accumulating time until the frequencies are so slow they'll give you 1 in 50 years of a tree, perhaps. The ant, the elephant, the sun, the solar system. Multiplied time, multiplied frequency, multiplied ability to accumulate these frequencies and wind them up to retard time for the sake of multiplying power. That's the lever principle. That's the fulcrum and lever principle. Shorten the lever, you lose time, you gain power. A man, by shortening the lever sufficiently and getting on the long end of it, can lift tons. Well, without that lever, he could only lift 100, 150 pounds with the lever and fulcrum of his own body. He's limited to that, but with the, as Archimedes said, give me a fulcrum and a lever long enough and I could move the universe. It's true. Does light spring spontaneously from nature? A college professor said it did not. There is nothing spontaneous in nature, in the sense that it is used. Everything in nature is planned. Everything in nature is the result of a desire to become, a desire to express in motion the idea of mind. Nothing spontaneous happens in your kitchen. In motion, the idea of mind. Nothing spontaneous happens in your kitchen after the dinner dishes have gone there. A desire to reassort them is followed by action. And the fulfillment of your desire takes place by action. A word spontaneous is used often in the relation of combustion, spontaneous combustion. If you leave a pile of refuse out somewhere and some kindlings in it, or even some decaying vegetation and earth that will burst into flame. That's not spontaneous combustion. That's the result of accumulated power, accumulated the power of decay.
The word magnetism connotes a physical attribute. A proper way to connect it to the electric universe of motion would be to term it the magnetic electric universe, meaning the spiritual physical universe, or the mind thinking universe, in the sense that the zero magnetic universe is the creator, and the motion universe is creation.
When man is fully aware of the fact that he eternally lives in the Creator's invisible magnetic light as one with it, and merely manifests life by action in the electric universe, he will then know that when action ceases, it merely ceases without affecting him, even as sound ceases without affecting him who made the sound.
This is the construct.
The Creator is the invisible, motionless, sexless, undivided, and unconditioned white magnetic light of omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent mind.
The word magnetism connotes a physical attribute. A proper way to connect it to the electric universe of motion would be to term it the magnetic electric universe, meaning the spiritual physical universe, or the mind thinking universe, in the sense that the zero magnetic universe is the creator, and the motion universe is creation.
When man is fully aware of the fact that he eternally lives in the Creator's invisible magnetic light as one with it, and merely manifests life by action in the electric universe, he will then know that when action ceases, it merely ceases without affecting him, even as sound ceases without affecting him who made the sound.
This is the omniscient universe of eternal mind qualities, from which transient electric qualities emerge to simulate the qualities of the Creator's magnetic light of mind, which are knowledge, idea, energy, life, soul, love, truth, beauty, rhythm, balance, law, silence, rest, and stillness.
The magnetic light is sexless, for it is in equilibrium. Its electric division into pairs creates the dual sex condition, which we know as male and female.
The Creator gives of itself to all the universe in an eternity of endless re-giving. The Creator's universe re-gives of itself to the Creator in an eternity of endless giving. That which the Creator gives is love. That which is re-given is love. That is the divine story of creation. It is a story of cause and effect in the giving and re-giving of love. It is the one story of the Creator's knowing, expressed by thinking, illumined by the light of imagining.
The time has come when unfolding intelligence in man should tell him that the divine spark of inspiration and the silent voice which speaks to him from within is the magnetic light of mind and the source of his energy.
The Creator, who is the knower, is non-dimensional. The Creator's thinking is two-dimensional. The Creator's imaginings are three-dimensional.
Creation consists of the invisible magnetic universe of mind, which man calls space, and the visible universe of motion, which man calls matter and substance.
The Creator's still magnetic light is omnipresent and omnipotent. It is in and through everything throughout eternity. The Creator's magnetic omniscience is expressed in the perfection of its electric creation.
While it is true that you and I and all of the other atoms in the universe are mostly empty space, it is also true that empty space isn't truly empty. And in fact, it is these vacuum fluctuations which are essential for our existence.
So far, what we've considered are waves that move along, and as they do, they transfer energy. And because they're transferring energy, we can say that these waves are progressive as they progress along. But what I'd like to look at now are another type of wave, and this kind of wave, it doesn't transfer energy, but it stores it. And what we're going to look at instead are waves that don't seem to move at all, and these are called standing or stationary waves. So it's these standing or stationary waves where we store energy, and they're quite different to the progressive waves that you've been used to so far. So how are these waves formed? Well, if we have a progressive wave that is moving along and it reflects off some kind of boundary or perhaps an endpoint, the reflected wave will come back, and this time the reflected wave will have the same kind of amplitude and phase difference, and it's the interaction of these two waves where we look at superposition and the overall resultant that gives us a standing wave. What I'm going to look at here is a series of standing waves that we can have set up perhaps on a string, and provided we have a fixed end at both sides, the wave that we set up can't move up and down at the ends because it's in a fixed position. And what I have here is the first standing wave that we produce. And what we have is at the end it can't move, and this is what we call a node, or effectively there's no displacement at the node. We also have a point of maximum displacement, which is an opposite to a node, and this is what we call an antinode. And all I've drawn in here is effectively the maximum and the minimum position of perhaps a string which is vibrating. I can repeat it for perhaps the second kind of standing wave that we can fit in. So again, we're going to have the ends must be constrained, but this time there's another wave that is actually the length of one complete wavelength. And if I draw that as one of its waveforms, the opposite to this at the other extreme, half a cycle later, looks a bit like this. And again, we have a node at each end. We also have a node, or a point of no displacement in the middle, and then we have an antinode and another antinode. Now the key thing about this is that because this is one wavelength, the distance from a node to another antinode is equal to the wavelength of that wave over 2. In this one here, this is also equal to the wavelength over 2, and so on. And if we repeat the process, what we have here, although slightly dodgily drawn, we do have various other standing waves that can be set up within the same distance. From the diagram so far, they all look a bit static, so this is what it would look like. Here we have a couple of nodes and the particles moving up and down in the middle, and then we also have another wave that has 3 nodes and also one that has 4. Looking in a bit more detail at these various diagrams here, perhaps we have a string that has length L. And what we have here is the first standing wave that we can produce. What we call this is the fundamental. For this fundamental, because the length is equal to the wavelength over 2, we can say that the wavelength is equal to 2L. And this happens at a certain frequency, which we call F0 or F0. And that is the fundamental frequency of that standing wave. Now there's another one here. This time, what we call this is the second harmonic. The reason being that the fundamental frequency is the first harmonic, and the second harmonic, the wavelength is equal to the length of that string, and we call this, where it basically has twice the frequency of the first one. And what we then have is the third and the fourth. And what we find with many musical instruments is that because we have all these harmonics, we have various multiples of that fundamental frequency. So what we find is that there are a number of modes of vibration, various harmonics, and we still have the nodes and antinodes, and as we have a higher and higher frequency, we can see the wavelength gets smaller and smaller.
The illusion of motion deceives everyone, so that the profound laws have been written by scientists which don't have the slightest foundation of truth in them, much less the very fundamental laws that I could see behind the scenes. When I came back, I bought textbooks to find out the names of that which I knew in space, in the universe, in another way as 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 0, 4, 3, 2, 1, and back to 0. That is all I needed to know. And the names of those, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., are in textbooks. Lithium, beryllium, boron, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine, one series of elements after another. But to me, they were always 1, 2, 3, 4, 0. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0 in everything. Whether that was the octave spectrum of color or the octave on the piano, every expression of motion is in the octave wave, and I knew the wave. And in the wave is the secret of creation, and I had that. I knew it in a timeless flash.
Hi, it's Mr. Anderson, and this is AP Physics Essentials video 115. It's on standing waves. Standing waves are like they sound. They're waves that appear to stand still. And so an example of a sound standing wave is the waves found inside a vuvuzela. And so you blow on it, you get that sound. You blow it with a higher frequency, and then you could even try to pierce your lips a little bit more and get an even higher frequency. But what's happening is you have these specific standing waves that sit within the chamber of the vuvuzela. Now, a wine glass works the same way. If you rub your finger with a little bit of water around the surface of it, what you can do is generate these standing waves inside the wine glass. What you're doing is vibrating the sides, and as you do that, you're vibrating the air, and since you have a standing wave inside there, it makes this pitch. Add water to it, and you're going to have a slightly different pitch. And so waves can either be traveling or standing waves. Traveling waves will move from one place to another, and standing waves will appear to stand still. Now, when you look at it, it's kind of an illusion. They're standing still, but the traveling waves are bouncing back and forth. In other words, they're being reflected off the boundaries, and then there's interference to create these standing waves. And so if we look at this animation, the dark wave is going to be the standing wave, but in the background you can see the blue and the red waves that are bouncing back and forth and back and forth, and it's the summation of them that creates the standing wave. Now, if you notice, that standing wave is going to have areas where it's not moving at all, and that's due to destructive interference, where the waves are canceling each other out, and we call those in physics nodes, areas where it's not moving. And then we're going to have total constructive interference in certain areas, and we call those antinodes. That's where it's moving the maximum amount back and forth and back and forth.
The spiritual aspects and why science uses matter to try to define matter, which again, a particle, you can't even, what a particle of what is it a part of? How can a particle be used to describe another particle? Right. Again, it's like saying the left side of the seesaw is responsible for the right side's motion, but yet any numbskull can look at the center of the seesaw and see that fulcrum there that doesn't move. You know, and that's one thing science can't see, so yet they deny it exists.
Welcome to the chemistry question. Jordan here. I talked in a recent video about models of the atom and how our views of the atom have changed over time. And it talks about how the electron cloud model is the current model of the atom. Last week, the first photo of a hydrogen atom was taken using a quantum microscope. The image confirms hydrogen's wave function. That is, we see the electron modeling a probability cloud around the atom, with regions of high intensity where expected, as well as nodes where the electron does not appear. That is, we see the electron modeling a probability cloud around the atom, with regions of high intensity where expected, as well as nodes where the electron does not appear. Hydrogen was chosen because it has the simplest electron configuration, just one electron in the lowest energy state. The research team is going to attempt to get an image of helium next. Heavier elements will be much more difficult, however. Thank you for watching the chemistry question. Be sure to subscribe and leave any questions or suggestions in the comments below. Until next time.
Fulcrum there that doesn't move. You know, and that's one thing science can't see, so yet they deny it exists. It's not just I can't see it or I don't know it's there. It's that, no, that doesn't exist. It must be something in the seesaw, the plank of wood itself. Let's look at this particle of the wood and try to use that to describe the motion of the wood. Well, that kind of approach is failing. I mean, there's no, it leaves you with all these disproportionate theories that they're trying to marry together. You have 100 different explanations, from string theory to the 500th Planck, all the way down to quantum this and quantum that, and somewhere they're trying to marry all these disproportionate theories together to create one big grand unified theory. Well, less is more. The simplest explanation is always the truest. And I have not encountered a model yet that's simpler than the cubic wave field model and more explanatory in the effects of motion, because I myself know that even at the center of myself, when I calm myself from an emotional, back and forth, I can think more clearly. I mean, you don't have clear thoughts in horizontal thinking. You're stuck on the seesaw. But when you become vertical, when you think vertically like the great geniuses do, you complete the cross and you can access the totality of your being to bring into existence new ways, new approaches, solutions, if you will. They don't call it a solution for nothing. I mean, you're bringing it down where it never existed into being. And so you're learning to manifest creative principles within your own life that, how can you fix somebody else if you can't even fix yourself? That's, again, the great self-work is what all this philosophy is here to do. The science is the act of acting out your concepts into physical form. There's a very real process to that. And I think it's what makes their work some of the greatest work out there. It's inspirational.
Now, if you notice, that standing wave is going to have areas where it's not moving at all. And that's due to destructive interference, where the waves are canceling each other out. And we call those in physics nodes, areas where it's not moving. And then we're going to have total constructive interference in certain areas, and we call those antinodes. That's where it's moving the maximum amount back and forth and back and forth.
That's not spontaneous combustion. That's the result of accumulated power. Accumulated power of decay.
Wave universe, 9 octaves. Gases begin the first octave, very dense metals, and the 9th octave, like the plutonium, being the last of the natural octave, or last of the natural elements. So you have very few rings with gases. You start at hydrogen, 1 electron or whatever. They call it an electron. There's no such thing, but it's more of a ring. And that ring I kind of like to use these words. There's a protonic force of inward motion or compression, a neutronic force, which is a point of reversal, and then an electronic force, which is the point of expansion back to stillness. So stillness compresses to a point and then expands in a reversal of direction back out to stillness. There's a protonic force of inward motion or compression, a neutronic force, which is a point of reversal, and then an electronic force, which is the point of expansion back to stillness. So stillness compresses to a point and then expands in a reversal of direction back out to stillness. And the way you can look at that too in nature is the breath. You breathe in, you start at 0, you breathe in, you stop at 0, reverse direction, and exhale out to do it again. So Walter's primary law is balance. If you need 2 words, rhythmic balance. If you need 3 words, rhythmic balanced interchange. And basically what that is a series of repetitions that repeats eternally. So you have removed the need for the Big Bang, and this is basically a mind wave universe that rotates on the still white magnetic light. Anywhere you look, the center of any object is a point of gravity. Gravity is not an inward pulling force. In Russell science, it is stillness, which divides into a north and south shaft upon which motion then rotates. So wherever there is a center of gravity, there's motion surrounding it, and that center of gravity can be likened to God. It means the same thing pretty much. Gravity and God are one in that sense.
Now, if you notice, that standing wave is going to have areas where it's not moving at all. And that's due to destructive interference, where the waves are canceling each other out. And we call those in physics nodes, areas where it's not moving. And then we're going to have total constructive interference in certain areas, and we call those antinodes. That's where it's moving the maximum amount back and forth and back and forth. And so an example of this could be found in instruments, for example. So a string instrument is going to be fixed at either end, and this animation is a good example of that. It's fixed on either end, and as the waves bounce back and forth, you create these standing waves. If we shorten that, like on a guitar, then we can get different pitches. A tube is going to be the same way. A tube could be open on both ends like a flute, or it could be closed on one end like a vuvuzela, and that's going to create these standing waves as well. So let's start with traveling versus standing waves. And so this PHET simulation, I'm generating some waves. Those waves, and this is just kind of theoretical, are moving out the door, and then they've moved on forever. But if we add a boundary on the other side, in other words, if we add a fixed boundary, you can see now there's a reflection back. So those waves didn't just keep going, now bounce back, and now they're going to bounce back again. And as that wave goes back and forth, you can see that we're starting to generate these standing waves. And you can even see those nodes and those antinodes. In other words, those areas where it's not moving and those areas where it's moving quite a bit. So this is an animation of standing waves. And so what we're doing is as the blue wave moves to the right, becomes the red wave, which moves back to the left, and it just keeps going and going and going. We're getting destructive interference. That's causing these nodes where they cancel each other out. And then we have constructive interference, and that's creating these antinodes, where those two waves add together to make a much bigger wave. Now, an example of this, if you've ever played baseball before, when you hit the ball, sometimes you'll hit it and the bat will kind of buzz in your hands. In other words, it vibrates quite a bit. And the reason why is that you're hitting the ball on an antinode, an area where the waves going up and down the bat are actually constructively interfering to create a huge vibration there. And we refer to it as the sweet spot, the spot on a bat where the node is, where you don't have much vibration, that you hit the ball and you don't feel really any vibration at all.
Clearly right.
Is counter space, is pure potential, is pure energy, pure non-Cartesian actuality. This is true power is rest, not manifestation of power. One might think ignorantly, as any human being would, that power would be an atomic bomb going off, for example. Well, that's true power. True power, one might think. But obviously, it's just the inverse of that, magnetism being analogous to the explosion itself, but that is impotency. The release of that power, the release of that energy is force and motion. It is the absolute loss of true power. True power would be that 3-pound lump of plutonium that sits in your hand like an innocent baseball. I mean, that is true power. That is about the closest analogy I could draw. I kind of drew that crooked there. It's hard to draw a perfect circle freehand like this on a computer screen to get the hypertrophoidal pattern, but I think you get it now. So anyway, thanks so much for watching. If you like this video, just click the link below. Anything to expand your mind. But this is the secret of Mother Nature, the conjugate nature of magnetism and dielectricity. Both are inextricably connected at the very core. One, magnetism is not something different than dielectricity. Magnetism would what we'd be calling, what we would denotatively and ignorantly call force, but It's not force. It is simply the loss of inertia that we understand to be dielectricity, or the counterspatial pure energy of the nature of the universe. Its manifestation, being force and motion, we therefore call it something else, even though it is not something else. We call it magnetism, but there is not an autonomous field modality known as magnetism. It is simply an expression of the loss of the potential of dielectricity, which must only and necessitatively form the geometry which we call magnetism, which is the creation of space and volume and force and motion. All of these are one and the same thing. That's the power as manifest, but not the power and true, which is completely unmanifest, necessitatively and logically so.
That's not spontaneous combustion. That's the result of accumulated power. Accumulated power of decay.
Wave universe, 9 octaves. Gases begin the first octave, very dense metals, and the 9th octave, like the plutonium, being the last of the natural octave, or last of the natural elements. So you have very few rings with gases. You start with hydrogen, 1 electron or whatever. They call it an electron. There's no such thing, but it's more of a ring. And that ring I kind of like to use these words. There's a protonic force of inward motion or compression, a neutronic force, which is a point of reversal, and then an electronic force, which is the point of expansion back to stillness. So stillness compresses to a point and then expands in a reversal of direction back out to stillness. There's a protonic force of inward motion or compression, a neutronic force, which is a point of reversal, and then an electronic force, which is the point of expansion back to stillness. So stillness compresses to a point and then expands in a reversal of direction back out to stillness. And the way you can look at that too in nature is the breath. You breathe in, you start at 0, you breathe in, you stop at 0. Reverse direction and exhale out to do it again. So Walter's primary law is balance. If you need 2 words, rhythmic balance. If you need 3 words, rhythmic balance to interchange. And basically what that is a series of repetitions that repeats eternally. So you have removed the need for the Big Bang. And this is basically a mind wave universe that rotates on the still white magnetic light. Anywhere you look, the center of any object is a point of gravity. Gravity is not an inward pulling force. In Russell science, it is stillness, which divides into a north and south shaft upon which motion then rotates. So wherever there is a center of gravity, there's motion surrounding it, and that center of gravity can be likened to God. It means the same thing pretty much. Gravity and God are one in that sense.
There's nothing in the nature but waves of motion. Waves multiply in the direction of their amplitude, and they divide on the way down. Back to silence of the zero from which it came. That's life and death.
to do is look up into the heavens and look at a spiral galaxy, and you'll see the exact same formation. In fact, every nucleal center is not exactly a solid mass. There's only one instance in the wave in which that's actually true, and that's at carbon, or what we call the wave amplitude. It's where if you imagine a sinusoid, it's where the crest and the trough is located. At that position, you've accumulated maximum potential by compression from the outside to the inside. And so it isn't a nuclear mass in the way that they teach it, where all elements have a nuclear mass full of protons and neutrons of a certain weight with orbital electrons around it. What Russell is really endeavoring to teach us is that there's a wave structure behind all so-called particles or particulate. A particle mass is really only an accumulation of waves in a smaller volume or smaller region of space. And so it based on all of our test equipment and what we have available to us, to our limited senses, it appears to be a particle mass. And that's what led to this whole explosion of trying to describe everything using particles. But in reality, it's the underlying mechanics behind everything is waves. Everything has a wave structure because everything is created and it lives. It has a life and death cycle, and that is fundamentally based upon the structure of the wave.
Yet